Hello, this is Jared from Yellowwood Guiding, and in this video I want to talk about real-world exposure. How do you make it work? How do you understand your histogram? And how do you adjust your settings from there? So here we got our camera. Remember, this is your f-stop, this is your shutter speed, and I've got an aperture priority mode. So as I adjust the aperture, let me get it back up here, the aperture adjusts, the camera will automatically adjust the shutter speed to get the same exact exposure tonality in every shot. So we have it right now dialed in at a 0 exposure compensation. So that means we're going to get a shot that's trying to make the world 18% gray. So if you left your camera on automatic, this is the type of shot you would get. So here is my shot from the weekend out at Horseshoe Park. This is Sheep Lakes. And if you take a look, I know this is a very technical term, but we've got blinkies. The blinking areas are areas in your picture that are overexposed. They are pure white. And this is why you don't want to let your camera work on automatic. So I want to take you through a bunch of shots as they go through the different tonalities that your picture or your camera can take. So we're going to go all the way from almost pure black. Right about here is as dark as the picture could get by adjusting the plus and minus button on your camera. So as we adjust the plus minus button from 0, we get different results. This is -5. So we made a very dark picture. You can see the only thing that's on and visible is just barely the white areas that would be highlights. So as we go through this picture spectrum, you can see it goes from dark to bright. You have right about there is about a good exposure, maybe right there is even better, slightly darker. But as you make your pictures darker, your shadows get darker. You don't get to see the detail. As you go brighter and brighter and brighter, you can see the shadows in these trees start to come out. But your snow and everything that was white is now overexposed. This is the downside of your camera. It does not see the world the same way that we do. As you keep going from brighter and brighter and brighter, more and more and more of your picture gets overexposed until you get just the darkest elements. You can see there just about everything is overexposed, and even there, even worse. So if you really want to understand what you're looking at, however, you don't want to rely just on the back of your monitor. What you really want to rely on is something called your histogram. We've talked about the histogram in the last video, but this right here is your histogram. Now watch, as we go through this spectrum of pictures, how your histogram adjusts throughout this set. So turn on the picture here again. Let's go through. We're going to slowly go through, and you can watch as this histogram starts to spread out and starts to get away from the edge. The edge is what's pure white. That is everything from here on out would be blinkies, and you want to avoid the blinkies. This is a procedure called exposing for the whites. We want to make the whites exposed properly. So as you keep going down, you can see there's a little edge here, so that's pure whites, and it keeps getting lower and lower and lower, and then right around in here, it's about level. It's almost to the edge, and right here, you have just a faint little line at -0.7. That's probably close to the proper exposure, but if you take a look here, your histogram is more level. It's not left oriented here as this picture is. Right there is probably the proper exposure for that light situation, but as you keep going darker and darker and darker, you can see your histogram keeps going more and more and more to the left. If you see something like this, obviously these are pure blacks. You're not going to screw up an exposure often this bad. But what often is going to happen is if you underexpose your picture, you're going to end up with a histogram that's leaning to the left. And this tells you, if you get a histogram like this, that it should be all across the spectrum. You should have something that's more like a bell curve. Maybe there's a spike. Obviously, there's going to be a spike here in the blue sky and in the whites. But this is what would come out of your camera automatically, and as we saw before, you get the blinkies. Not a lot of blinkies, but maybe more than we should have. So if we go back here, we adjust down here, and now we're not touching the edge. So how do you adjust? If you want to adjust and work your camera in aperture priority mode, you're going to see that we have this plus minus button on the top of this Nikon, and on just about every camera except Canon's. Canon uses a slightly different system. They have a symbol that looks exactly like this, a plus minus. So you look at your histogram, and you say, okay, I'm either too bright or too dark, it's too much in one direction, and you adjust. So if I go back here to my info mode, if I press the plus minus button, you can see it comes up, and when I was at 0, if I dial this dial on the back for Nikons, some Nikons have it on the front, you can adjust a positive and move your histogram to the positive side, make things brighter, or you can dial it into the negative. And how do you know how far to go? Well, the beautiful thing is you don't have to do all the math. It's not like using a full light meter and you had to figure out every exposure. You can take a look at your picture, and if it's way over here, we would know we were at plus 1.7. That's way too bright. We'd want to make it darker. So if we were at plus 1.7, we gotta go the right way, here we go. If we were right here at our exposure, we would know we want to make it darker to move that histogram away from the edge. So we would make it more towards a minus side. How far do you go? Well, to keep it simple and until you gain experience, just move it around until you see your histogram. If you're dealing with landscapes, mountains never run away. The light may change on you, but you got some time, and that's a great way to learn. Wildlife photography is all about getting it right the first time. Landscape, you get a little bit more leeway. But the most important thing is to learn to expose for the whites. Don't overexpose your whites. Don't underexpose things so you have your shadows that are way too dark. If you take a look at this picture here, you have your shadows over here in the trees. They're so dark you don't get to see anything. So you want to expose properly, and the question then is, how do you see your histogram? On various cameras, that's going to be different. Generally, you're going to hit your play button, and then you're going to either hit your command dial on one of these. There might be an info button, or on my cameras, I have it set up on my dials. Every camera is slightly different, but you generally always hit your play button that looks like the play button on a VCR, and then you're going to look for info, display, or some other thumb adjustment. Get your manual out and figure out how you can see your histogram. Then you want to figure out how do you adjust. You find that plus minus button so you can adjust throughout your spectrum, and you can see you dial that plus minus button in to the shot you want to get, and you are going to learn exposure extremely fast. So your homework assignment, go out, take about 2,000 pictures by playing with your histogram, come back, and you will be a near master of exposure, and you didn't have to waste any film. So that's exposure in the real world.